this review, we're going to be talking about the Sharpshooter specialization, its skill tree, and the ins and outs of using this class. Since there's a bunch of perks to go through in the perk tree, we'll be breaking them down into categories to try and get a clear picture of what the Sharpshooter class really is. I started to categorize the perks myself, but then ran across a PCGamesN.com article that did a really good job of categorizing everything, so I'll put a link to that website in the description of this video. Anyway, the four categories are general modifiers, weapon modifiers, skill modifiers, and miscellaneous modifiers. But before we delve into that, let's just quickly talk about what the Sharpshooter class is. Once you unlock the Sharpshooter specialization, you'll get a fourth weapon to use in combat. It's the TAC-50C sniper rifle. It's a monster, and as you might have guessed, choosing this class will incentivize long-range combat, so if you like using rifles and marksman rifles, this will probably be the class for you. That being said, a lot of the perks we're about to go over will greatly benefit other playstyles as well, so let's just jump into the general modifiers so you can see what I'm talking about. One in the head is a perk with 5 tiers, but once you have it maxed out, headshots will do plus 25% more damage. It's a pretty decent chunk of extra headshot damage, especially once you start working on a gear build centered around outputting even more headshot damage. Deft Hands is the next perk. It's one of my favorite perks in any of the 3 specializations. There are 3 tiers to this one, and once you have it maxed out, you'll be able to reload any weapon 30% faster, which is pretty insane. The next perk is called Breath Control, which is another one of my most favorite perks. It has 3 tiers, and it will improve your weapon stability, recoil, and target acquisition by 30%. Just like the Deft Hands perk, Breath Control is awesome for any weapon type. My Home is My Castle is a perk that will give you extra armor while utilizing cover. It doesn't offer a ton of extra armor, but it's still better than nothing. The Vital Protection perk can be found in all 3 specialization perk trees. It will reduce the chance that you're critically hit by 20%, so it's pretty badass. It'll make you a little more tanky, and again, you can get this perk with the Demolitionist and Survivalist specializations as well. The last perk in the general modifier category is the Sharpshooter Tactical Link. This one gives your group members plus 10% headshot damage if they're closer to the enemy than you. Not a super crazy perk, but it'll help the team a little bit. Now on to the weapon modifiers, starting with the Flashbang. It will blind enemies in a pretty large area for around 5 seconds, and I personally like the Flashbang a little bit more than the Frag Grenade, but not as much as the Fire Grenade that you get with the Survivalist specialization. The next perk is the Sharpshooter 93R pistol. It shoots 3-round bursts at a very high RPM, but it only has a 20-round magazine capacity, and it's not all that powerful. It's also stuck at a gear score of 300, so I think it's a garbage perk, especially for the 10 points it costs to unlock it, but I guess it can't all be winners. Now on to the signature weapon damage perk, which has 4 tiers and offers up to 145% more signature weapon damage. Having this perk maxed out in conjunction with a headshot build will allow you to do insane amounts of damage with the TAC-50C sniper rifle. Next is This Is My Rifle, which is a perk that increases rifle damage by 15%. Doesn't sound like a whole lot, but some of the rifles can actually shoot fairly quickly, so the extra 15% damage per round is actually pretty nice. The last perk to go over in the weapons modifier category is the Digital Scope. It's actually a mod that you can equip on rifles and marksman rifles. It grants plus 45% more headshot damage and negative 5% critical hit damage. This is one of my top 3 modifiers in this class, next to Deft Hands and Breath Control. The scope feels good, and if you're using a serious sniper build, that 45% extra headshot damage is hard to turn down compared to the other scope mods. The next category to go over are the skill modifiers, and I think this is the weakest part of the Sharpshooter specialization. The first perk you'll unlock is the Tactician Drone, which is a drone that you can send out to mark enemy locations. There is some utility to this, but since you can only have 2 skills equipped at any one time, most people are going to go for something else, including myself. I suppose if you're playing with a group, the benefits to the tactician drone become more profound, but it's generally not too difficult to figure out where the enemies are, and I think it's one of the weakest skills in the game, to be honest. Anyway, the other two skill modifiers buff the tactician drone. One is called Graphene Battery, which increases the drone's duration, and the other perk is called Carbon Fiber Frame, which reduces the cooldown period of the tactician drone. The last category to go over are the miscellaneous modifiers, and then I'll give you my overall impression of the Sharpshooter Specialization. The first modifier is the X-Stat Armor Kit Supplementary. With this perk, armor kits repair 50% of your armor, or 50% less of your armor depending on how you look at it. But it will also remove any status effects, and it will make you more resilient to bleeding, burning, and hazard effects for 20 seconds after applying an armor kit. I can see how some people might like this perk, but I'm not a huge fan. If I'm set on fire, I typically just get out of the fire, and I'm fine. And the 20 seconds of resilience to status effects is okay, but what are the chances that you'll need it? Most players don't typically plan on getting hit with status effects. Whenever I use an armor kit, it's a last resort because I desperately need armor, so the 50% less armor sucks. Alright, we spent enough time on this perk. Let's move on to the next one. It's called 50 Caliber Ammo Acquisition. Headshot kills will drop ammunition for your signature weapon, the TAC-50C. This perk won't work with headshot kills from the TAC-50 itself, but if you're playing a sniper build anyway, you should be getting a lot of headshot kills with your normal or marksman rifles anyways. The next perk is called Group Signature Ammo Supply. Whenever you kill an enemy with the TAC-50, there's an increased chance of signature ammunition dropping for every member in your group or raid team. Round after round is the next perk. After 20 seconds in cover, you'll get 5 rounds for your rifles, and you'll get 5 more rounds every 10 seconds after that. Kind of a worthless perk. Most people don't spend that much time behind one piece of cover, and ammunition usually isn't that hard to come by. The last perk in the miscellaneous group is the Marksman Uniform. It's kind of cool, I guess, but I personally prefer customizing all my apparel slots for a unique image, and I think most players would agree with that as well. All 3 specializations in the Division 2 have some worthless perks, and all 3 have some pretty awesome perks, so let me tell you what I think of the Sharpshooter Specialization. If I had to rate the Sharpshooter class on a scale of 10, which I know is, kind of subjective, I would give it an 8 compared to the other 2 specializations based on the following perk bonuses. Plus 25% headshot damage, plus 30% reload speed, plus 30% weapon stability, 15% more damage done with rifles, the flashbangs are okay, 145% more signature weapon damage, and the digital scope that offers 45% more headshot damage, which is pretty awesome. Everything else is kind of whatever, but everything I just listed makes the Sharpshooter class really great for anyone who prefers long-range combat. The 2 points I'm deducting from the Sharpshooter Specialization comes mostly from the Tactician drone, especially when you compare it to the other skills you'd probably rather have equipped. Again, identifying enemy locations isn't all that difficult, so a skill that does damage or heals is probably of better use in most situations. The Demolition Specialist is one of 3 specializations you can choose to play as in the Division 2. As far as the 3 specializations go, the Demolitionist is all about area of effect and explosive damage. In this review, we're going to break down all of the Demolition Specialist's talents, and we'll talk about what the pros and cons of playing this class are as well. Once you choose to play as a Demolitionist, you'll be handed the M32A1 grenade launcher, which will be your signature weapon. It's personally my favorite signature weapon out of all 3 specializations. Whenever I think of AoE in a video game, I think of an attack over a large area at the vast expense of damage output to any single enemy, kind of like a shotgun blast versus a sniper shot, but the grenade launcher that you get with the Demolitionist class is absolutely brutal. Launching a grenade into a cluster of enemies is insanely satisfying, and you'll most likely kill most of the enemies in the group, and the ragdoll physics in the Division 2 are on point. Anyway, let's dive into the perk tree, which is divided into 4 categories. We got the general modifiers, weapon modifiers, skill modifiers, and miscellaneous modifiers. Let's begin with the Demolitionist's general modifiers, starting with the incombustible talent. This perk gives you a 20% resistance to fire damage. It's not the craziest buff in the game, but it's much better than nothing, especially since there's still 19 other perks to go through. The next talent is called Explosive Ordnance. This perk increases explosive damage output by 25%. This is probably one of the Demolitionist's strongest talents, and we'll get more into why in a little bit. The next perk in the general modifier category is called Vital Protection. Every specialization has this perk, and it reduces the chance that you're critically hit in conflict by 20%, making you a little more difficult to kill. The last talent in this modifier group is the Demolitionist Tactical Link, which grants group members a 5% damage buff against targets that aren't in cover. You'll also see this buff somewhat frequently on light machine guns, which makes sense for the demolition specialist, where using LMGs is definitely incentivized. So let's move on to the next category of perks, the weapon modifiers. Onslaught is a talent that increases LMG damage by 15%, again, incentivizing LMG use. Spray and Pray increases SMG damage by 15% as well, so the demolition specialization doesn't promote the use of long-range weapons. If you decide to rock an SMG and LMG, you'll be great for close to mid-range combat, but pretty useless at long range. Next on the list for weapon modifiers is the Fragmentation Grenade. This grenade is made more powerful with explosive bonus attributes, and it also incurs bleed damage on enemies. It's not a terribly ineffective grenade, but it's still my least favorite out of the 3 specializations. Next is the Dicerus Special Revolver. This pistol is unique to the Demolitionist, but it isn't all that great. Just like the other 2 specializations pistols, the Dicerus Special is capped at level 300, and it doesn't output as much DPS as higher gear score pistols that you can simply find through loot drops. The Gunslinger perk increases sidearm damage by 10%, which is better than nothing, I suppose. Signature Weapon Damage is a perk that will increase the grenade launcher's damage output by 145% once all tiers have been purchased. I would highly recommend maxing out this talent as soon as possible. It will make the grenade launcher much more worthwhile to use. The last talent in the weapon modifier group is the Small Laser Pointer mod. It's an attachment that you can put onto most weapons that will increase critical hit chance by 7%, which is really nice. Now let's move on to the skill modifiers, which is comprised of 3 perks. The first one being the Artillery Turret itself. The Artillery Turret is a skill that you can use in combat. First, you have to deploy it in a location that will allow a clear path for its mortars to travel. And then once the Artillery Turret is deployed, you can simply tell it where you want the mortars to shoot. The next skill modifier is called Cyclone Magazine, which gives the Artillery Turret extra mortars for a total of 4. You can increase the number of available mortars even further by using mods. The last modifier in this group is called SHD CPU version 2. This perk simply increases output damage of the mortars. You can increase the amount of damage even further, again, by using turret mods if you have the skill power, or by using an explosive character build. So the last group of the perk tree to go over are the miscellaneous modifiers, starting with the XStat Armor Kit Supplementary. Initially, an armor kit will repair your armor by 70%. It will then increase your weapon handling by 100% for 15 seconds. Once the 15 seconds expire, you'll get another 30% repair on your armor. Next is the 40mm Grenade Acquisition perk. This will give you an increased chance of signature weapon ammunition dropping from kills that you get with explosive damage. So if you need grenade launcher ammo, try getting kills with explosive damage. Next in line is the group signature ammo supply. Every specialization has this perk, and it increases the chance of signature ammo dropping for your group whenever you get a kill with your grenade launcher. Crisis Response is a perk that will refill your active weapon's ammo whenever your armor drops to 0%. Personally, none of the ammunition perks for any of the specializations are all that great since ammo isn't too hard to come by. Not a useless perk, but not very needed either. Braced for Impact is kind of a cool talent. You can passively ignore explosive damage once every 60 seconds. The last perk to go over unlocks the Demolitionist uniform. I'm not a huge fan, and I'd rather customize my own apparel slots for a unique image, but I do respect the developer's decision to give all 3 specializations their own uniforms. Because, when you wear a specialist uniform, your teammates can quickly tell what type of class you're playing with. But again, most people would rather just make their own character's image a personal touch. Compared to the Survivalist and Sharpshooter specializations, I would give the Demolitionist an 8 out of 10, which is the same score I gave the Sharpshooter specialization. If you think the score should be lower, try using an explosive build with the Demolitionist specialization. It'll make all the difference. The grenade launcher, frag grenade, artillery turret, and merciless exotic rifle, if you have it, are all buffed by explosive damage. Mini fights can end before they even start when you have a proficient Demolitionist on your team, as long as the enemies are close enough to each other. There are parts and missions where you'll know a group of enemies are going to be, and I would advocate letting the Demolitionist kick those fights off every time with an explosive AoE massacre. I'm sure you've seen it where players will run willy-nilly into a fight, making the conflict much more time-consuming and difficult than it should have been. If you know you've got a Demolitionist on the team, let them melt whatever they can melt right off the bat. If they don't kill everyone in a cluster, they'll at least almost be dead. There are a few reasons I'm taking 2 points away from the total score. One of the reasons is that none of the perks incentivize long-range combat. If you're playing a straight-up Demolitionist build, you're going to be stuck with close to mid-range combat, which isn't the end of the world, but still sucks when having to deal with snipers. Don't get me wrong, the LMG is one of my favorite weapon classes in the game, but I do think the SMG isn't as versatile as assault rifles. Another reason I'm taking away 2 points is the fact that the artillery turret isn't always useful. Many times you'll find that the mortar can't reach the enemies you're trying to hit. Low ceilings and other obstacles can render your artillery turret useless. The Survivalist specialization is one of 3 different specializations you can choose to play as in the Division 2. While the Sharpshooter focuses on incentivizing long-range combat and the Demolitionist focuses on close-range combat, the Survivalist fits perfectly in between the two, incentivizing mid-range combat. Whenever you choose to play as a Survivalist, you'll be handed the explosive-tipped crossbow, which is the Survivalist's signature weapon. It does a nice amount of damage to a single enemy, as well as causing bleed damage if the enemy survives the explosion. The AoE effect of the explosion is kind of small, but can definitely mess up a closely grouped cluster of enemies. So let's go over the Survivalist's perks and talk about what's good about the Survivalist specialization and what isn't so great. The perks are separated into 4 groups: general modifiers, weapon modifiers, skill modifiers, and miscellaneous modifiers. At the end of this review, I'll give you my overall opinion on the Survivalist specialization compared to the other 2. So let's get started with the Survivalist's general modifiers. Elite Defense is a passive talent that will give you 15% more protection from elites. This perk has probably saved my life a ton of times. 15% extra protection from elites is nothing to scoff at. The next perk in the general modifier category is the Triage Specialist. This passive talent increases outgoing healing by 15%, which means you can heal your teammates 15% more effectively. Triage Specialist works very well with the Survivalist's skill modifiers, which we'll get more into in a little bit. Crunch Time is a talent that increases your skill cooldown time by 10% while utilizing cover. Vital Protection reduces the chance you're critically hit in conflict by 20%. All 3 specializations have this perk. It essentially makes you a little more difficult to kill. The last perk in the general modifiers category is Survivalist Tactical Link. This talent gives you and your team 10% more damage to enemies who have status effects. Now let's move on to the weapon modifiers category, starting with the Incendiary Grenade. The Incendiary Grenade is the best grenade in the game, in my opinion. It has a pretty large area of effect, it does damage to the enemy, it prevents them from aggressing you, and best of all, the flame can make it through walls. If you've played a lot of the Division 2, I'm sure you've run into the problem where enemies don't make it out into the battlefield and get stuck behind a door or a wall. This can prevent you from continuing on with the mission, but oftentimes you can actually kill those enemies with an incendiary grenade through the wall. Anyway, best grenade in the game. Let's move on to the next perk. The Survivalist D50 is a pistol that's unique to the Survivalist specialization. It's the most powerful pistol of the 3 specializations, but it's also the most sluggish. Unfortunately, all 3 of the specialist pistols are capped at level 300, making them irrelevant in combat. Gunslinger is a passive talent that will increase your sidearm damage up to 10% if you unlock both tiers. Signature weapon damage increases the crossbow's damage up to 145% if you unlock all 4 tiers, and honestly, this goes for all 3 specializations. Signature weapons aren't very practical unless this perk is maxed out. I recommend trying to max out this perk sooner than later so you can actually get some use out of the crossbow, grenade launcher, or sniper rifle. The next perk in the weapon modifier category is called Running the Gun, which will give your shotguns an extra 15% damage output. When you think about how much damage a shotgun does, and then you add 15% on top of that, it's actually a substantial amount of extra damage. Next up is a passive talent called EMI, which gives your assault rifles an extra 15% damage boost. Assault rifles are my favorite weapon type in the game, so I personally really like this perk. The last perk in the weapon modifier category is a mod called the Infantry 5.56 Magazine. This mod will give your weapon 30% further optimal range, which is super nice if you're looking to add range to an assault rifle or LMG. I personally prefer using extended magazines, but it just depends on what you're trying to go for. The next category is the skill modifiers, which consists of 3 different perks. The first one is called Mender, which is a type of seeker mine that you can equip as one of your skills. It can repair your armor, or you can send it over to a teammate to repair their armor. Out of all the 3 specializations' unique skills, this one is my favorite. It's kind of like the Fixer drone, except it rolls around on the ground, making it harder for the enemy to destroy. Next is the Magnetic Disc perk, which is actually a skill mod. It reduces the cooldown time by 9.7% for any seeker mine that you're using. If you want to utilize this perk, remember that you actually have to equip it. It doesn't take much skill power to use. The last perk in this group is called Laria Tridentata Infusion. This is another mod that you can equip. It will increase the healing capability of the seeker mine by 14.5%. So let's move on to the last category of perks, the miscellaneous modifiers, starting with a talent called Distributed Repair. When you use an armor kit, it will take 5 seconds for the armor repair to reach 100%, but any of your allies that are within 10 meters will also have their armor repaired during that 5 seconds as well. So it's not great if you're in dire need of armor, but it's pretty awesome for the whole team. The next perk is a talent called Explosive Bolt Acquisition. If you kill an enemy while they're inflicted with a status effect, there's an increased chance that they'll drop signature ammunition for your crossbow. Next on the list is called Group Signature Ammo Supply. Whenever you get multi-kills on status-affected enemies, there's an increased chance of signature ammo dropping for everyone on your team. Scraping By is a talent that gives you 5 ammunition for your active weapon when moving from cover to cover in combat. I think this is kind of a throwaway perk. It's rare that you'll ever be so strapped for ammo that you'll need to concern yourself with performing cover to cover runs. So the very last perk to go over is the Survivalist uniform. I've said this in the other 2 specializations reviews, but You know, the uniform's okay, but I think most players will want a customized look. I believe the reason the developers decided to make all 3 specializations their own uniforms is to clearly show other players what class you're using. So, respect to the developers for the thought, but most players will want to present their own image. The Survivalist specialization is currently my favorite specialization in the Division 2. If I had to give it a rating out of a possible 10 points, I would give it a 9 out of 10. If you've seen my review on the Demolitionist and Sharpshooter specializations, you know that I gave both of them an 8 out of 10. So let me explain why I'm giving the Survivalist 1 point more than the other 2 specializations. The first reason is the incendiary grenade. It's like the flashbang, except it does damage, but more importantly, you can be the sole person that saves a whole team a huge headache when an enemy doesn't make it out of their spawn zone. So not only do I think the incendiary grenade is the best, but it also helps to fix glitched enemies. The next reason is the Survivalist's skill modifiers. The Demolitionist has a mortar turret, which isn't always usable, and the Sharpshooter has a drone that can mark enemies, which isn't very needed. So the Survivalist, in my opinion, has the only special skill really worth using compared to the other 2 specializations. Also, and this is a little bias coming through, I think assault rifles are the best weapon class in the game, so the 15% extra assault rifle damage is something I really like. The 15% protection from elites is awfully nice as well. All of that being said, the crossbow doesn't do as much damage to a single enemy as a sniper rifle, and it doesn't output as much AoE as the grenade launcher. It's kind of in between the two. And one more thing about the crossbow is that it can kind of be a hassle to aim correctly, so it isn't as reliable as the other 2 specializations' signature weapons. So my justification for the 1 point I am not awarding the Survivalist is mostly due to its signature weapon, the crossbow. It's not a bad signature weapon, I just don't think it's as good as the grenade launcher or sniper rifle. So, do you agree or disagree with my review of the Survivalist specialization? Please let us know what you think in the comments section, and if you like this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up. If you like my content in general, please consider subscribing. Thanks for watching, and Godspeed.